I don't care if you're an internet troll online. I don't care if you follow only certain people, but I welcome everybody to start reading people that they don't agree with. I welcome them to follow people they don't agree with. I welcome them to, have safe spaces offline, because that's even more important, where you don't just surround yourself with friends you agree with. You surround yourself with friends you might disagree with.
Hey, Han.
Hey, Sheree.
How's it going?
It's going good. Yeah, how about you?
I'm doing good. I'd love for you to tell our guests who we have on the show today.
So Snigdha Sur is, I want to call her like a media badass, but like, I don't know what other to use. She is the founder and the CEO of the Juggernaut, which you may have heard of. It's an incredible subscription publication for South Asian news. They publish awesome stories that are really like the kinds of things you should know, the kinds of things you want to know, the kinds of things you need to know. And they pride themselves in telling untold context. And previous to this, she's done a bunch of stuff in business and media, including working in McKinsey and Bollywood. She's advised at BuzzFeed. She's a grad of Harvard. Basically, she's got all of the receipts.
I'm also excited. Just fun fact for those listening. So Han has this Missy Elliott photo in the back of her screen. Poster is a better way to say it. But one of the things that was really cool when we were talking to Snigdha is she pointed out that Timbaland actually sampled a lot of South Asian music to make like the beats. And so if you think about Get Your Freak On and the like that whole thing, very much like Bollywood South Asian music. And so I think what she's doing at the Juggernaut is really cool because beyond just regular news, it's all these like cultural moments that like we're not thinking about, but we take for granted. So I'm super excited to have you on the show, Snigdha.
So without further ado, let's welcome Snigdha up on the show.
So Snigdha, welcome to the show. Tell us the moment it just got real.
It was the week of December 11th. I was awfully sick. And I remember on Thursday, December 14th, writing an email to all of our customers. I mean, the entire list, including our free newsletter list, not just our paying subscribers, and telling them, hey, prices are about to go up. And today's the last day. They're going to go up tomorrow. And I had also told my engineer, like, build it so it's reversible. I just didn't know what was going to happen, but it was a very scary moment for us because we were just about to raise the bar, because once you raise the bar, you can't go back.
So what led you to making this decision, and why was this a big deal? I mean, businesses raise their prices all the time. So I think maybe in reverse order, why was this a big deal for the Juggernaut?
Yeah, I think, the mission of the Juggernaut, for those who are unfamiliar, has always been to tell powerful South Asian stories, to connect the community, to, inform, to entertain, but to also challenge and unlearn. And it was always my intention to make it as accessible as possible. So I think when we first launched, it was $52 a year, which is, I think, like $4.50 a month. Like, it was just supposed to be less than or about a cup of chai. Cups of chais are now like $7, $6, $8 in New York City.
I was like, yeah, which city is this in?
I know.
Where are we getting $4 chai?
I know. And so I always wanted to be like super accessible because, it was really important for us to pay our writers and pay our, journalists, and to pay our editors, and to pay our product managers, and pay our engineers fairly and responsibly, to pay as much as we possibly can. And remember, venture capital for so long has made people used to really cheap, low prices, like DoorDash or Uber being insanely low. So yeah, most businesses do raise prices, but most startups don't, because they're so kind of focused on that engine of growth. I remember The Athletic, one of the co-founders, Adam Hansman, is one of our investors, and he told me The Athletic ran on discounts for years where they were like $2.99 a month. And like, that's how one of the levers of growth. The Juggernaut had never discounted. We'd never done any of that. So that was always really scary. But what had happened by 2023, which many of you are very well aware of, is venture capital had mostly dried up because the Fed had raised interest rates, which meant that when the Fed raises interest rates, discount rates go up, which means that if you look at the future value of any company, any publicly traded company, and divide it by a bigger number, that entire value goes down. So public markets became very enticing. People were investing in Bitcoin. People were investing in public stock. They were investing in NVIDIA. They were investing in all this AI stuff. That means private markets, aka startups, are much more risky and not as worth it when you can just get into the stock market as a retail investor. People were getting into Facebook cheaply. People were getting into NVIDIA. People were getting into all these public stocks. And so funding had dried up for a lot of founders. And not only had funding dried up for venture capital, you have to remember that, funding for women has always been crap. It's been less than, I actually went down, people who are already not considered prime targets for investment, they actually fare even worse. It went from 2.69% of VC funding toward women to, I believe, 1.9%, even 1.6%, according to some measures. If you look at the funding for Black founders, it went down to 0.13%. If you look at the funding for women of color, I believe it was still 0.0006%. Did I say enough zeros here? So I think that you're operating this context where capital isn't cheap. Capital is almost inaccessible. And so it's scary in an inflationary environment where people and consumers are already struggling, where the prices of groceries are going up, to be like, hey, guess what? Your favorite subscription, we're going to increase that price too, because it's getting harder for us to operate in a sustainable manner. So that's why it was hella scary, because I was like, there's all those trolls out there who think I'm just a profit hungry business person. I can assure you I am not, because I would not be doing this business. But it was just, just kind of like a traumatic moment for me, because I was like, oh, we might be making this just even less accessible for some people who really will benefit from this. But it's what we need to do to be long-term sustainable, to be long-term profitable.
So it's part we need to raise our prices because of this backdrop of the environment, and kind of prices for everything needed to go up. But then also part having the challenge of not being able to raise capital for the business and needing to create more margin to be able to sustain the business. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, basically, our LTV CAC is roughly 5 to 6x, which means that once we acquire a customer, we make back 6x on them throughout their lifetime. But you need to have that cash cycle to sustain that, which means they have to keep on purchasing it and renewing and things like that. And we have really high retention rates. When capital is less, it doesn't mean that we can't keep growing. It just means that it's harder to grow unprofitably. As in, we know we lose money on that first transaction, but we know we make it up by the second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth. We make it up by the second, actually. But it's even hard to outlay that capital to acquire that customer, because we're like, wait, do we even have that 1 year runway to make sure that we get that money back on that second transaction? It was one of those moments where the maths, but you need to have a cash cycle of at least a year to make it worthwhile. So it wasn't that our business wasn't fundable. It was more that if you don't have that cash cycle, you got to rely on your customers then to kind of fill that gap.
So that's what I was going to ask next. What happened? Because I can imagine if I'm about to press the button on that email, I'm thinking a bunch of things like, oh man, people are going to unsubscribe, or maybe less bad, but also complicated for the business. Maybe our subscription cycles are going to change. We have more monthly subscribers instead of annual subscribers. That throws all of your data out of whack too. So what happened?
Yeah, those were some of my fears too. I was like, is everyone, because we had also ended our free trial in June. So our plans that were available were annual at $99, monthly at $13.99, and a student at $44.99. We also had a lifetime plan for about $499, which is one time, and then you have the Juggernaut for life. And that was my hypothesis. I was like, everyone's going to move to the monthly plan, because they're going to be like, 99 in one go is too much for me. It used to be 72. I'm going to move to the monthly plan. I'm going to do it once, and then I'm going to unsubscribe.
Yeah.
We were so surprised. I think that what's been happening in the last few years is that we weren't the only ones who were increasing prices. Spotify increased prices, Netflix increased prices, Hulu increased, every single streaming company,
every single subscription
had increased prices. And they all said the same story. They're like, we need to rely on profitable growth. We can no longer meet or exceed market expectations by keeping our pricing the same. And in a way, I think they had trained the customers for me. And so that was my biggest fear. I was like, oh, we're going to switch to monthly, and and our retention numbers are going to go to crap.
Yeah.
Fascinatingly enough, yes, there was some movement to monthly in terms of proportion every week, but I was still surprised that a lot of people were still opting for the annual. That is the most economic and cheapest plan if you annualize it. It's cheaper than the monthly plan by 40%, over 40%, or about 30 to 40%. And so that's one thing that happened. The second thing that happened is there's a price quality lever that happens, which is when you pay more for something, you assume it's more quality, right? Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually saw growth increase. And I know there's like a whole holiday and January, like there's a seasonal effect as well, which is in the new year, people are like, I want to get smarter. I want to get, fitter. I want to get hotter. Whatever the things are,
hotter for sure.
Hotter. Sure. And so in December, we saw our growth rate just go off the heezy. Like we were just growing so much in December and January. We had like 2 of our best months we'd ever had in our entire existence. And that completely surprised me. And like, it was one of those things where I was like, is this like, have I hacked life? Do I need to tell all founders to do this? Like all founders just raise your prices, because it raises the bar for sure. It's like, oh my God, people expect more from you. But if you can deliver the quality, you will be rewarded, because now people are like, wait a second, like they are confident enough to charge $99 a year. They're confident enough to charge $13.99. And I basically would say in even our marketing, because our stories deserve to be told too. Like we deserve to be paying people. We deserve to survive. We deserve to thrive, not just survive. We shouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck. And so I think some of that worthiness kind of conversation and everybody else training people kind of worked out for us, luckily.
You spoke a little bit about like accessibility. And I have kind of like a 2-part question on that. One, as much as you saw business growth, which as a founder, like that obviously was good, especially in the backdrop of a really challenging funding environment. But of course you lost subscribers. And then I imagine the numbers don't tell the whole story. There's also sort of a larger perception gap. You mentioned, there's maybe a perception of you around being this like only thinking about the money kind of founder, and like whatever that is in the world, how much of that did you have to work through in making the decision and on the other side of it?
Yeah. So one thing to clarify is we didn't necessarily lose subscribers on that move, because we actually grandmothered/grandfathered everybody into the old plan. So like anybody who wanted to, we gave them a 1-month notice. We said, hey, if you want to subscribe, this is the last day to do it. That was my December 14th email. It's like, today is 24 hours, last day. One thing, founders, I will say, if you're going to say you're going to raise your price, you just got to do it. You just got to do it the next day and commit so people know you're real. And I had some angry people emailing me. They're like, wait a second, did I miss the deadline? Like, can you guys still honor the old price? And I was like, I'm so sorry. I gave you a month's notice. Like, we can't, just to be fair to our other customers who have signed on to the plan. So that is one way to get around that, is by grandfathering and grandmothering in all your older tenured subscribers. People get less angry because it's only the new people. It's the new people who are late to the party that have to pay up. And the older people who trusted you and trust your vision, and that was the price point that made sense to them, they'll never deviate from that price point. The only time they will deviate is if they end up actively canceling and then have to resubscribe, because then they can never find back the old price. That's why we always say, are you sure you want to cancel? Because you're not going to get back that old price. Going to have to go back to that new flow.
So all those people you grandparented in, they are going to have that price in perpetuity.
Whatever they had, whether it was $52 or $72, it just reduces the angst.
Yeah, for sure.
And in terms of my vision, people calling me, I've gotten so many trolls that are like, oh, what credentials does Snigdha have to start the Juggernaut about South Asian stories? First of all, stupid question, because nobody asks men what credentials they have. But second of all, I got the goods. Like, I was a South Asian Studies major at Yale. I was an economics and South Asian Studies major. I was one of the first to get the entire degree at Yale, so much so that when I got my degree, it was wrong. It said economics and Southeast Asian Studies. I had to go to the registrar after I graduated to get it fixed. They're like, South Asian Studies? We haven't given a degree in South Asian Studies in a while. I'm like, yeah, because that's me. Like, I did it. And so like when people say that I don't have the credentials, it's hilarious. Second, I actually have been studying journalism since I was 14. I was part of my school newspaper. I used to write actually even before that. When I was in middle school. Yeah, when I was in middle school, I used to write a lot. I actually once wrote a book of poetry when I was like 7 and printed it out and bound it and made everybody in my family read it. But when I was in high school, I won the Al Newhart Freedom Scholarship, which was written to the best high school journalist of each male and female of each state. I won that for New York. When I was in high school, I also co-taught a journalism class with some of the best journalists from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal.
You got the receipts. The receipts.
I wrote for the Yale Daily News and photographed for the Yale Daily News. So I was also, a lot of my friends from the Yale Daily News have gone on. We had the same training to write at the New Yorker, to write at the New York Times. So when people say Snigdha Sur has no receipts, they just don't know how to read, because they can go and find my bio and then read up. Because I did graduate from HBS, but I think that's what allows me to be smart about what the metrics mean and what the profits mean and what it means to have a cash cycle. Like, I learned how to value a company at HBS. They taught me how to use financial models. Like, if you don't know how to use financial models, I'm sorry, you're dead on arrival. You don't understand what the levers are to change your business. They only build and bolster what you can do. So yes, increasing the prices. Yeah, maybe I'll have more people and more trolls who are like, oh, this girl's like, what does she know? She's this corporate junkie. And I'm like, you know what? Bring it on. Because why don't you try to walk up 2 miles in my shoes and try to get all the degrees I did? Sure.
I have so many thoughts. I think one, I'm sensing from you this like a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, and I'm around this feedback. And so I would love to know less about the business part, but more about how this has felt to be a person that has worked what's very obvious to all of us really hard since you were 7, clearly writing books of poetry when I was just trying to do hand games in my backyard. But like, I would love to know, like at a personal level, you're doing what is very much a business, like a huge opportunity, but also one that's very clearly close to your heart and to your like personal mission. And it sounds like you faced some significant pushback along your journey. How has that made you feel?
Yeah, I mean, Sheree, always asking the tough and great questions. I mean, it obviously doesn't feel great because you're building for a community that often just wants to bring you down. And I think you probably also have some experience with this, which is some people call it tall poppy syndrome. They're like, whenever they feel somebody in front of them is getting any success, whenever they see you at parties, whenever they see you tweeting anything of joy, they think, oh, like, what can we do to bring this person down? Is this person going outside of what they deserve? And I think that like it's kind of really twisted and weird. And I think part of it is we also have another friend who's really, talks about the toxicity of social media. We had this beautiful childhood where we were kind of sheltered from a lot of comparisons to other people, right? We grew up without, Instagram and Facebook until we were like in our teens or sometimes later. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that, younger generations are never going to experience that. They have TikTok or they have Instagram from when they were born. And so I'm very jealous of people like my partner. I feel like some men, it's way easier for them to be like, oh, I don't care what people think. And they genuinely don't care what people think. And society rewards them that way as well. Like, no one really cares what people think. Whereas for me, and I've asked some of my other female founders this, we sometimes do care what people think about us. And maybe it's because society also cares about what people think about us. Maybe it's this weird, like, parallel lives we're all living. And no matter what I do, it's like, oh, I can't care about this. I'm just going to do what I do. And like, people will see. Or, sometimes people say the best revenge is just thriving. But the thing is, when you're a thriving woman, a lot of people don't like that. They just don't. They don't want you to be thriving. And there have been moments where like I will stop myself from tweeting something or stop myself from posting something that I'm really proud of because I'm like, wait, who will say something about this? We just added a new teammate, a new writer. I'm so excited about her. She joined on Monday. And I was like, oh, I can't tweet this because if I'm going to tweet this, people are going to be like, oh, like something about like who we hire or how we hire, or like who is this girl who has the audacity to keep hiring during this time when there's journalism layoffs? There's going to be some narrative. And all I can tell myself and future people is like, I just try really, really hard, especially on the weekends, to turn off my social media, to read a book, to kind of understand the social relationships that lead to what we see. I'm reading a book right now called Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. And it is hilarious. I don't know if you read this book, but the premise is this white woman steals the manuscript of her Asian American friend and passes it off as her own and changes her own name from June Hayward to Juniper Song to sound more ethnic. And it goes from there. And what's more funny about this novel is that it kind of explores that idea of like she falls into the Twitter world of where she sees her likes go up as she becomes popular because her book becomes a hit. But she also sees like the trolls coming after her as soon as she becomes a success. And I thought that book, one of my friends recommended it to me during this time. And I thought that book was really helpful because it just reminded me that this is what's going to happen throughout history, which is that I know this isn't very nice to say, but it's like when we thrive, people are going to be upset. But you know what? All we can do is keep thriving. And like finding the people close to you. Sheree, a great friend of mine, Sheree, told me this, is like just observe and notice and find the people who are really close to you, who are genuinely your friends, not those online people, and like just spend more time with those people. So
I was curious to know, what are some of the ways that you go about keep on thriving and like fuck the haters? Because what you're talking about is so real. It's something that any woman who has received just the tiniest bit of success, whether it be in work, family, life, whatever, we all know that feeling. And dealing with it is way easier said than done. What do you do?
yeah, I think a lot of what I've learned to do, and this has been so recent, only in my last year. I hit my 1-year anniversary recently, actually, of it all started with my partner slipping and falling, like not this past December, but the December before that, and hurting his ankle. And he went through a lot of physical therapy. And ultimately, he was like, you know what? I still don't feel healthy. And I kind of suggested back to him, hey, have you considered hitting up your old personal trainer from your Equinox days? He no longer goes to the gym. And he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. So he starts going down this rabbit hole. And somehow I got finagled into joining him into couples personal training sessions. And truly, that is my love and joy. Every Wednesday, every Sunday, without fail, we see this personal trainer as a couple. It's made us as a couple stronger. It's made me physically stronger. I can now do 3 pull-ups in a row, which is insane. But the idea of what are the things that no one else can touch and or control but you? And when it comes to our physical health, when it comes to, there's natural endorphins, when it comes to what we eat, who we spend time with, what kind of workouts we're doing that are giving you endorphins. It's just been so lovely because I've just seen my health, my physical health, no matter the crap that's happening at my company, no matter the trolls I get sometimes, I have created a bubble around my physical health and they cannot stop me. And so that kind of gives me that courage to keep thriving. And then I keep on posting my pull-up videos. I'm like, yeah, I'm that girl. I'm that girl that will post my pull-up videos because guess what? I can do a fucking pull-up. So,
I mean, I have never been able to do even half a pull-up. I have forever hung on the bar and let go. So I'm very impressed with your consecutive pull-ups. I definitely get the things we need to do. And I think it's something I am trying to, I'm very much a resilient person.
You are.
But one thing I love about Hannah, and you have a lot of these traits too, is like Hannah's very like, she's just gonna like march after it. And I'm a little more like, I really have to process because if I don't, like if I get to marching too soon, it's not going to be for real. It'll be a false start. And so I think the thing, especially as someone who knows you well, and I think the journey of the last month or so, we've had like even more connection, like a reinvigoration of our connection, which I'm like super thankful for. I think the one thing I'm holding or that I'm feeling is like, and I think it goes back to my question around like this mission work, is if you're experiencing this sort of takedown sensation where you're feeling like, the same community that I'm building for doesn't want me to thrive. And there's perspective in that, right? So sometimes there's more to it and there's something for us to learn. There's something about the way we're showing up that's not translating. And I think we should always be like attuned to that and not like write things off. But then there's always this like weird thing. Like when I was building Tastemakers, I remember getting to a place where I really felt like the folks I was trying to champion or the folks that thought I was building for or the mission, like didn't want me in the seat. Like, and it was really hard for me to find motivation to do anything with the company when I got to that point. And I had to challenge whether that was actually true or whether I was listening to, a few people or like there was a lot to work in. So I'm listening to you deal with this tension. And I guess at like a personal level, how are you like, yes, you're keeping on thriving and you're like cutting through the noise, but like inside of yourself as a mission driven person, how are you sort of unwinding that ball of like knotty yarn that you're doing something to move literally like your people, like in the grandest sense of the word, forward? and to make sure that your people are seen, but you're not always feeling like that by the same people. And how are you working through that tension, if at all, besides like the thrive anyway?
Yeah, I think that tension is, like, to your point, might always be there for various reasons, whether you're thriving or not thriving. There might just be people, to your point, let's say I'm not even thriving, and there just might be people who are like, wait, why is that person in that seat? I like that analogy. And it could be because of the way you come off. It could be I'm overconfident. It's because maybe we have too much power because now we have a lot of followers. Who knows? Like, why do they get to dictate what is coverage and what's not? But I think as I've gotten older in this quote unquote seat, I've realized that, like, no answer is perfect. I don't know how to explain that. Like, it's like, I do care a little bit less about that. I think there's moments where I care a lot. And I'm so thankful, Sheree, we've gotten even closer this past month. There's crucible moments that will happen where you're like, oh, I care a little bit more. I'm a little bit more attuned to what the community thinks. But then there's also moments where you're like, wait a second. You know how you sometimes write a draft or an essay when you were in college, and then you got to sleep and then look at it with fresh eyes. You need some of that distance to make the answer better. I also think that, like, I don't need to be sometimes, I know this is a hot take, but I don't need to personally be so close to every single person or every single thing I'm covering to have that distance to analyze. And I actually think sometimes it's good to have that distance. You know, when people see me at a party or a South Asian party, they think, oh, I'm doing it for the party. Frankly, I view those parties as work. I'd rather prefer to just sit in my home and, like, work, and because that's just who I am. And the party is a culmination of years of work. It's not the party itself is the reward. And so, you know, I think here's a good example, because I feel like I'm talking in theory. I felt so bad because, you know, Dave Patel, who Sheree knows, has come out with a movie that Jordan Peele has co-produced called Monkey Man. And I was like, am I a traitor? Because I didn't like this movie that much. But
it'd be like saying you don't like the Beyonce album.
Right. Except my job as a critic, I have to put on the hat of the critic, is to, you know, make sure I'm putting everybody under the same microscope, not just have a separate lane for Dave Patel because I think he's awesome and super talented. He is awesome and super talented. And so is Jordan Peele. And I can also believe and give hopefully constructive feedback that this film could have been better. And so I felt really bad after I wrote this review, which is also very fair. I'm happily going to share it to you. And I got a lot of hate from all the Dave Patel girlies and guys, and neither, you know, anyone who identifies as no gender too, or like a different identification. And a lot of people who love him were like hating on me and were like, who is this girl? Why did she write this? I assure you, if you read my review, it's very balanced, it's very fair. I back up everything I say with data and details and observation. And that's a great example of where I think the expectation of the community is, why isn't Snigdha just happy that there's a film called Monkey Man? But that's the problem. Like, I'm not happy with just representation. My goal at the Juggernaut is to explain and to analyze and to elevate and to question and to challenge. And that doesn't mean we have to celebrate everything. In fact, us covering it is a celebration. I'm so glad this film exists, and I talk about that. We need more films like this so that when I criticize one of these films, it doesn't feel like a thorn in your back. It feels like, oh, it's just a normal day.
Oh, that was good. There's some bars in there. There are some bars in the space for critique within the communities you come from, are championing or celebrate. Even the space for, I always like, there's this like Black excellence thing in our community that like I am thoroughly in rebuke of. I'm like, I want to exist in a world where Black mediocrity is also okay. Like I just want to be able to be regular, and I don't want to have to be like a super Negro all the time. Like sometimes I just want to be regular and still be afforded like the basic things. But like there's also like this drama with this, she's a comedian. Her name is Amanda Seales. She's a really interesting character. She came of age in New York. She was on Insecure, but she like made the statement about how she's wasn't invited to the NAACP Image Awards. And then some Black publications basically wrote like, you weren't invited because people don't like you and you're not nice. And so then there was like the space against the Black publications that were like, it's one thing to critique, but you can't take her down. And so there's like all this discourse that's happening around like, is there a space to be like, girl, the way you act is not okay. And like, is it okay for this like publication, not an Instagram page, but a publication to write about that? Is it critique and discourse? is it not? Some people are coming for the journalist. Like, who are you to write this about this artist? Like, you know, like there are, and I think even if you move it beyond race and you move it to gender, or you move it to tech, or you move it to, like, there was the whole story about
Kara Swisher.
Yeah. So there's a whole conversation about Kara Swisher's book and how like, who is she to talk about the big tech titans, and who, like, so I just think this idea around discourse within the bubbles you are inside of, especially if you're trying to championing them, like, when is the space to be like, no, or that isn't good, or like, I actually am going to hold it accountable. Like, I just think you touched on so much in this conversation around your positionality, what it means to truly achieve the mission of the Juggernaut, which means widening the tent enough to leave space for critique. And I think that's like I just thought it was, one, like, shout out to you. I think it was such a beautiful articulation, but it made me think about all the other spaces where we are hesitant to be viewed as negative to sort of the causes or, like I said earlier, communities that are close to us. And I don't know if, Han, you've had sort of similar experiences in this kind of space, but I just think it's an interesting thing to kind of pick apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone that is trying to better represent some type of marginalized anything carries this weight of like, oh, how do we have like, you know, how do I express like a balanced opinion about this thing? Because there's so few things like it, and therefore there's less opinions, that like if we say anything less than good, it's like not okay and going to reflect badly on us. Mm-hmm. And like, I mean, I've definitely a lot of the time just sort of like acted by that, you know, the age old wisdom of like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But I also feel like I hold back so many opinions, and I would like to share more opinions. But like, you know, you were talking about social media and the toxicity earlier, like you just can't. And also today, as a white woman, you extra cannot. Oof. Like people are just not going to be okay with that. Like there's things that I might have an opinion about that I want to share, but like people are going to come for you with like pitchforks. Like you can't have any opinion that is negative on something, especially if it's about someone who is marginalized. And to your point, sometimes you just didn't like it, or the art wasn't good, and that's okay. And like, that's not a bad thing. Like, keep trying, make more art, do more stuff. This is like, this is culture. This is how it works. Not everything is going to be a home run.
Right.
Like, we have talked about the Beyonce album like a ton on the pod recently. And like, you know, Sherry was like, oh, what did you think of it? And I was like, I, you know, liked some of it, but didn't like all of it. And like, I can separate like the art from the artist. Like, I love Beyonce. I am a huge Beyonce fan. I have been to her concerts. I want her to keep making amazing music. Yes. I want her to keep expressing herself and keep experimenting with all the things that she's experimenting with. I'm so happy she put that album out, like 10 stars, you know? But I also just don't really like country music. And it's not a knock on Beyonce. I just don't like any country music. I grew up in a place that was full of country music. I spent most of my life just not liking it and trying to get away from it and figure out how to buy hip hop albums in Alberta where people wanted to wear cowboy boots and listen to country music. I just don't like it. And so it's not like but like, I can't say that out loud. People are going to come for me. They're going to be like, oh, who's this white girl hating on the Beyonce album? It's like, I just don't like country.
That also feels restrictive, Han. I think
it's super restrictive.
Restrictive. Because also you should be able to say what the hell you want to say. Like, also, I don't like that.
Yeah. I only had one nit about the Beyonce album, which was like, I think I tweeted this. I didn't know why 16 Carriages wasn't spelled with 2 I's.
Because all the other ones.
I was like, someone missed this?
Did that come from the fact that she couldn't spell Levi's with 1 I first because it was going to be like a copyright thing? And then some smart person was like, what if we did this 2 I thing throughout all of the tracks?
But they missed 16 Carriages?
I don't know. Getting back to your editor's hat, like we've just come through on like talking about, hey, how do you actually have discourse, right? Which is what we try and do on this pod too. We try to like dig into these moments and have real discourse in an intersectional way because we don't see this happening anywhere else. Like, you are a journalist, like you see this happening, probably like this demise of real discourse. Like, what do you do to maintain it? What do you do to create pockets of it? You know, we kind of can't share opinions anymore.
Yeah.
Problem.
I think one of the beauties of the Juggernaut, and also, you know, going back to that critique point really quick, Sheree and Han, I also welcome critique. And for me, critique is different from trolling. Critique
Absolutely.
for me is like, hey, let me express an opinion and also give constructive criticism, which is something like this. Hey, the Juggernaut, I really wish that you guys had more articles on business and tech. Here are some writers I would love to hear from. I'm like, that's great. That has an observation, desired future behavior, and even has something actionable for me to go dive into and be like, oh, let me go stalk these writers net right now because you like them. Let me see how I can add them to the Juggernaut. Now, going to your point about how do you encourage discourse, what I love is like, I would love and welcome both of you to go to the Juggernaut comments. It's become like a self-policing place where like someone will say something, someone else will say something. They're all like kind of talking to each other. And I'm like, that is the biggest gift I can give to my audience, which is that I hope that you can either even create an anonymous Instagram account. I hope that this is where you can comment and say your opinions. We even have comments on Juggernaut articles. I hope this is a really great place where you can think about, you know, what you feel, hear what other people are feeling, because everyone's going to have a different opinion. Even in the most banal of things. Like we had a one Instagram reel of this amazing choreographer named Prabhudeva, and we posted the original Tamil version instead of the Hindi version of this one song. And some people were like, oh my God, I love that you did the Tamil version. Some people were like, oh my God, this is, you know, so great to see this. Some people were like, I don't know what the hoopla is about. Like, you know, everybody had a different opinion, but I'm like, you know, we're not going to police those comments unless it devolves into actual violence or hate or threats, but like it allows them to self-police. To your point about how do I maintain my open mind, I actually love reading people who I don't agree with all the time. So I subscribe to the New York Times. I also subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I have sometimes read articles from the Free Press by Barry Weiss. I subscribe to The Economist. I read the New Yorker. Like, I try to read so many different opinions because it has made me a better person. And I think it's weirdly made me a centrist. I think when I was younger, I was probably a little bit more adamant about certain things. But then as I got older, I started seeing the other side of things as well. So for example, AOC saying we should have a 70% tax. This is a very easy thing to talk about. As I got older and I talked to people, including my dad, they're like, well, if I was taxed 70 cents on every dollar I made, I wouldn't work. And I was like, wait, that's a really good point too, right? Like, so like, I think that's what's missing from discourse, which is like, I don't care if you're an internet troll online. I don't care if you follow only certain people, but I welcome everybody to start reading people that they don't agree with. I welcome them to follow people they don't agree with. I welcome them to, you know, have safe spaces offline, because that's even more important, where you don't just surround yourself with friends you agree with. You surround yourself with friends you might disagree with. There is a guy from my college who is super, super into things I'm not into, and I follow him. He has over 500,000 followers. He wrote a very famous book. He might know who I'm talking about, which was like great things Democrats have said, and it's all blank. And it became a viral, you know, bestseller on like Amazon or something. Like, this person is somebody who, like, you know, we might disagree on a lot of things, but what I'd like to think, he still follows me on Twitter. He has answered my calls when I've asked him questions about things. I like to think we can still be civil to each other. We can still be friends. We can ask each other questions. We can still learn from each other. It doesn't mean that I sanction everything he says or condone everything he says. And he probably doesn't condone everything I say or, you know, anything I believe. But I think we've lost that ability.
Yeah, I mean, instead of engaging in discourse, we cancel people. And it's funny. I never thought I'd be like the outspoken person against cancel culture. But I think, I mean, it's funny. I think about there are just people right now that are taking unpopular takes or making unpopular alliances right now. And we are at a place where, like, you cannot do that. I think about Tiffany Haddish and like all that she's experiencing right now. Like, whatever you agree with, like the fact that there's not even space for her just to decide to go against the grain on what she believes is like a little bit wild. Like, yes, we can be like, I don't agree with you. Yes, we can say all the reasons why. You can leave every single comment about like to educate her on your opinion. But I think when we move from like discourse to denigration, like we get into a really dangerous spot. And I think that's exactly where we are. Like, I think as a society, we are either like hand reference, we're not even being ourselves and saying what we want because people are going to come for us, or we are taking someone down without listening. And also not just being able to be at peace with like, I think different about that than you. And like, that's literally okay. Every moment doesn't have to be a conversion moment. And I think we are past the point of that now being like the thing. And it is, it's really sad, to be honest. Like, it's really sad, and it leaves no space for like growth or cohesion or really like in the state of the world that we're in right now, like actual peace, because everything is convert and conquer. There's like no space for peace.
It's actually so colonial when you say it that way, convert and conquer. It makes me think of like lack of religious freedom and cultural freedom and all these other things that the US as a country has been, founded on not being. And like, how the heck did we wind up here now? Something I wonder about a lot is like how we teach people to have discourse or how we teach people to critique, because I went to design school, and in design school, you learn critique. It is drilled into you from the day that you get there. In fact, 50% of my mark was based on how you show up in critique. 50%. Wow. That is huge. Okay. So that means you can ace every project. You can get like, an A on every single assignment. But if you're late for critique, or if you don't present well, or if you don't engage well as a participant, you could get a 0. And you're failing that entire degree. So it is like huge. Like there is a very large incentive to show up and do critique well. And like, I have spent so much of my career now working in tech, teaching others how to critique properly, in particular engineers. And like, sometimes you see them kind of doing this like, naturally, where you see people like pair programming and like critiquing each other's code and stuff. But sometimes also it doesn't come as easily, and there's a minute to like step back and be like, okay, I think what's happening right now is we are critiquing this product, or we're critiquing this UI, or we're critiquing this flow or whatever. Let's just get into the rules of critique here for a sec, which is, we're not going to bash it. Don't take it personally, say something nice, and then say something you can improve about it, use the sandwich. And it's surprising to me how often there's like highly paid adults that literally do not know how to do this very simple act of like critiquing something. And the group that I often worry about even more than engineers, because they usually get the hang of it pretty quickly, is the PMs, like the people that have come out of business school in particular, the MBAs. They do not know how to do this at all.
Wow. That's your people, Snigdha.
Yeah. And usually like the designer is on the receiving end of like listening to an MBA critique their work, like, oh, I don't really like that color. And it's like, okay, that's not how you do it. Let me show you the right way to say the thing you're trying to say. Also, your opinion doesn't matter on that one. But it's like, okay, well, let's talk about that color. Like, what's really going on? Oh, I see. You think this, okay, great. You can help them get there. And so I've spent like so much time wondering, like, how do we coach the next generation? Like, how do we coach children in school? Like, how do we teach them this way of having discourse? Because otherwise we're like headed for this place where like people don't know how to interact with each other and disagree.
I think you got to critique your children more, right? You got to be like, hey, when you do this, it made me feel why, but can you try this next time?
I have a 15-year-old, and one of the things I've been trying to get him to do first is to be able to actually construct his own arguments. Because part of the reason we're not doing a good job with critique, because we're also not doing a good job forming opinions in the first place. Like, the fact that we have a saturation of other people's opinions at the ready on our phone all day means most of us are just parroting some amalgamation of other people's opinion all of the time. You know, we're just instinctually collapsing thoughts to the point where half of us can't tell the difference between someone else's thought they've heard and their own. And so one of the things I've been trying to do with my son is like really dig into him on like, why do you think that? So when he gives me an answer or he says no, I'm like, why? Like annoyingly so. Like he's definitely over it. Like .com. Like he is not happy about it. But I'm just like, how did you decide you don't like that? Where did that come from? You know, what are like, how did you arrive at your conclusion? Because part of people's difficulty with critique is that they're on freaking autopilot. Yeah. They haven't tapped into their why. They haven't tapped into the decision they're making. They haven't tapped into what they feel behind an opinion because they're just autopilot. Discourse requires real thinking. It requires critical thinking first and foremost within yourself. So if I haven't done that, how am I then going to give that to you and ask that of you? And it's like the age of the smartphone has really done away with that middle layer of critical thinking in a lot of young people. And this is as a person who is like, shit, I joined Facebook when you had to have a college email address. So that was late in the game after high school for me. But like we mentioned on this episode and others, this generation hasn't had that privilege, which means those of us who are charged with raising this generation, whether you're an educator, you're a mentor, you're a older cousin, auntie, mom, dad, like whatever your role is, there is a challenge to all of us to find space to get young people to actually form opinions and to know what it means to think something for yourself. Like, I think it's really, really important that we do that. And I'm literally trying to teach it, but also learning how to teach it in real time because it's something I know I personally took for granted.
Sure. I was going to add another group to that list of like, not just children, but venture capitalists need to return
also
to
venture capitalists
principles thinking instead of parroting other people's views. Because I was actually talking to one of my angel investors about this, just to build on what you're saying, which is I can't educate, my job can't be to educate VCs. Like, but as we've seen, there was an older generation of venture capitalists. The reason venture capital became such a great asset class was because there was a group and generation of people who were thinking differently, who were like, wait, I'm going to make a bet on this person. I don't know what this weird picture sharing app is, but it weirdly is growing fast and the customers seem to like it. I'm going to go invest and it's going to become Instagram. But now we have this world where I just had this experience with Sheree. Everyone's just talking about AI because that's the hot thing. And every venture capitalist is like, I got to invest in something that's AI. And I'm like, wait a second, can we like peel back the onion a little bit? Like, what do you believe, going back to data and principles?
What do you believe?
in 5 years is going to be, because, you know, every bet you make today, it's going to have to come out in 5 years. Like, what do you actually believe? What do you actually believe is going to win in AI? Like, this goes back to the Web3 craze. People are like, consumer is dead. And I keep on asking them, why do you think consumer is dead? Or people tell me, like, media is dead. I'm like, wait a second. All media is not dead. What do you mean when you think media is dead? I've even talked to some of my angel investors where I'm like, they're like, oh, I'll help you raise. I don't even know if they're communicating the Juggernaut effectively. And they're like, I can't help you. Like, you know, media isn't a great asset class. I was like, wait a second. Did you know that BET sold for over $2 billion to Viacom? Did you know that Politico exited for over $1 billion to Axel Springer? Did you know that The Athletic sold for over $550 million in cash to the New York Times? Did you know Axios sold to Cox Media for $525 million? And like, do you know all of them raised at least $10 million out the gate, which we haven't even done. We've raised like 3. So don't you think that we need at least 10 million to get that escape velocity so I can return $1 billion to you guys? So like, when I ask people, why do you think media doesn't work? They don't give me a first principled answer. And all the companies I name, by the way, are very specific targeted plays.
100%.
Axios is local news. The Athletic is sports. Politico is politics. The Juggernaut is for South Asian stories. Name me a targeted company that's not freaking valuable.
I mean, the VC opinions is like a whole other podcast.
But that's what I'm trying to say. Like, even like everyday people, I'm like, forget the children. I'm concerned that adults who also were not exposed to social media have become sheeple even in adults, by being exposed to Twitter.
Yeah.
That's concerning to me because these are the people who are also voting and donating to political candidates and investing in the future generation. And I'm like, are we hollowing
and building
out
the products that we use every day? Like anytime, I see this kind of behavior go down, I'm like, oh God, you could be building the next Facebook. You could be building the next, and you don't actually know how to think for yourself. You don't know how to critique things. You don't know how to get curious, to Sheree's point, and ask why. Why do you think that?
Yeah. The VC piece, I'm still there. But anyway,
Speaking of opinions, you were mentioning an opinion piece.
I did.
I think you should tell all of our listeners about this opinion piece and the opinions that came out of the opinion piece in our record scratch today.
Okay. So my record scratch moment, which is when I was like, what is happening to me? Am I living in a simulation? So I was at a party in LA, as one is wont to be. It was a party for a pre-Oscars party because in 2023, South Asians killed it. There were a lot of nominations. Not Do, which was a horrible performance at the Oscars, but was an amazing performance on the actual movie RRR, the Telugu movie that became this huge global blockbuster. There were all these famous celebrities there. It was great. So there's this pre-Oscars party, and the Juggernaut was invited to cover it. I was invited to attend. Thanks to all the organizers who invited me. I think Shruti, huge shout out there too for you specifically. And I was in a circle with like Veer Das, this famous comedian who has a Netflix special, one of my mentors and favorite people ever, Sanjay Sharma, producer. And Sanjay was like, I want to introduce you to Priyanka Chopra. And I was like, Sanjay, that is a huge introduction, but I will take it. So Sanjay is slanting me towards Priyanka and goes, hey, Priyanka, I want to introduce you to Snigdha. She founded the Juggernaut. And Priyanka takes, not without any beat at all, no hesitation. She goes, oh, you're that girl. You're that girl from the Juggernaut. The Juggernaut. I know the Juggernaut. You guys wrote shit about me. And I was like, what just happened? I was like, and then Veer Das, who's a comedian, is like looking, Sanjay's looking. And then before I know it, Priyanka Chopra has walked out of the circle, walked past me. Her PR person, who's this blonde lady, turns around and goes like, yeah, Priyanka didn't like that. Keeps walking. And then Veer Das goes, that was awkward. We should talk about something else. And then before I know it, that moment has ended. And I'm like, what just happened? I'm like almost red. I sometimes do turn red. I turn to Sanjay. I'm like, Sanjay, did I mess up? Like, what did I just do? And he's like, nah, you're good. Like, da, 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 da. And I was like, okay, this moment is over. This was horrible. Priyanka Chopra hates me. Nick Jonas hates me. Nick Jonas is looking at me from across the hall. He's like, who is that girl? She sucks. Cause like my wife just walked away from her. And I thought this moment was going to be over that night, but it persisted and continued because the next day I was flying on almost a red eye to South by Southwest in Austin because I was speaking at a panel, as one is also wont to do. And who else is in the green room right before I'm speaking but Priyanka Chopra Jonas? And Priyanka looks at me, I look at her, Priyanka looks at me, and I kind of, try to put in a joke. I was like, Priyanka, I should have just joined you on your private jet since we're here at the same place. And Priyanka goes, you should have. And then she approaches me and hugs me, and all my friends are freaking out and secretly recording this video, which I probably have somewhere in my phone. And Priyanka goes, keep up the good work. You guys are doing good work. And I was like, okay, thank you. And then, I leave, she leaves, we both have to speak on things. And I was like, what just happened? I guess Priyanka Chopra knows who we are. But the opinion piece you're speaking about, Han, is that several years ago, there was a moment at BeautyCon where Priyanka Chopra had spoken to an audience member who asked her a question about, hey, you're a UN peace ambassador, but you tweeted something that seemed that it was promoting war with hashtag #JHind. Can you comment on that? And Priyanka Chopra kind of responded a little bit condescendingly and said, hey, girl, don't yell. And she said she walked the fine line. She felt she had to walk the middle line. But I think a lot of people from the South Asian community were a little bit concerned because this woman is incredibly talented. She is super talented, super international, super amazing, and super media trained since she was a teenager. And it felt like the answer could have been just a little bit more gracious towards differing opinions. And it made CNN, BBC. So the Juggernaut, of course, had to cover it. We weren't trying to be extra mean to her. I swear, Priyanka, if you're listening to this, I don't know why you would be. We weren't trying to be mean to you. We literally had to talk about it because people would be wondering why the Juggernaut wasn't talking about something that every other major outlet was talking about.
Yeah.
And so we were balanced. There was an opinion article. I did not pen this opinion article. I did edit it to make sure it was fair and had facts and had supporting statements. But that was my record scratch moment when I really think that I cannot believe, A, Priyanka Chopra Jonas knows me enough to yell at me in public, and then B, knows me enough to hug me in public. So Priyanka Chopra, you made my day, because truly I am in awe of everything you have built and what you have done. And I cannot even believe I was within inches of your greatness. And I think truly no, I'm serious. I'm not trying to be I really am not trying to be weird about it. I really think I'm in awe of her. She's done such incredible work. She's an excellent actress. And a lot of my favorite Bollywood films star her. And I cannot believe that because of the Juggernaut, she knows who I am. So that was a pinch me, record scratch simulation moment for me.
I love that.
I love that. There is it's such a special feeling. I'm going to call it a special feeling when someone who you really look up to and is crazy famous tells you off. It happens. It's like, oh, wow, you know about me and my work well enough to tell me that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That just happened.
Yeah. And I think honestly, good for her. I'd rather she be out in the open about it, about her feelings about me and the publication than be resentful about it and hold it in. Because I think we had a breakthrough. I think we were okay.
Sounds like you did. I'm so happy that she spoke up and that you had that moment. That is such a beautiful record scratch.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you. I think we're at the end of our show today.
Thank you so much, Snigdha. It was so wonderful having you on the show today. We are so grateful for your time and your stories and the energy and enthusiasm you brought to this discourse today.
Well, thank you, Han. Thank you, Sheree. I feel like I could talk to you all for hours. So that just says something. And I've learned a lot about how I should raise my kids. And if I have it in the future, I'm just going to ask a lot of whys and just annoy the hell out of them. I cannot wait. Or I can just introduce them to Sheree to do that work for me.
On your behalf. On your behalf. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.